Hello, I'm Ken Taylor with Commercial Truck Training, and welcome to part 2 of Cost Per Lead. In the first segment, we talked about large lists and the effectiveness of those lists, which I'm not going to go into detail about, but I think what we pretty well determined is we have to break them into small segments because we have to have a follow-up mechanism. Let's talk about really good leads, and let me give you some examples. Number one, I mentioned RL Polk, which is a great source for lists. And one of the things we do, though, people get those lists without a strategy in mind. Here's the strategies we use when we get a list. Number one, are they already in the market? Because RL Polk has that list, I mentioned it in the first video, that's a predictability model of when someone's going to be buying. That's a great list. Let's suppose someone else is having major engine problems or major recalls. What a perfect time to get a list of all our competitors' trucks that are being driven by local companies. And then we can attack that market because they're probably going to be a little bit dissatisfied. So we look at recalls as another reason to get the list. Maybe we've got a new product out that's fantastic, or it's well priced, or maybe we've got a surplus of cargo vans. Well, let's get a list and target cargo vans. So think about targeting when you're thinking about lists. Also, think about this, and here's a whole different way to approach lists. And this is not a mailing list, this is a showing list. In our dealerships, we have every salesperson make a list of 30 prospects that they would like to do business with, but they're not. We write down the names of the companies. We look in our database to make sure someone hasn't already sold to them and already owns that client. And then as we go out and we're talking to friends, we're talking to relatives, we're talking to our current customers who already know, like, and trust us, we ask a very simple question. By the way, Bob, Mary, could you help me? They always say yes. As soon as they do, we say, I've got a list of companies that I would like to do business with. I'm just curious if you knew anybody from any of these companies. Typically, they always do. In fact, the smaller the community, the better, because everybody knows everybody. So when people ask me, well, Ken, is that an effective list for a small community? It is a more effective list for a small community, by far. So keep that in mind as we're looking at marketing and taking things to the next level. So it's a very, very simple list to use. Going back a little bit to lists and something that most people never really even think about. We talked about getting the vendor list. Think about the people that you have a great meeting with, but they're dedicated to Ford or they're dedicated to Chrysler or GM or whatever competing brand. No one ever asks these people for referrals. Usually out of guilt, because they can't use you, they want to give you referrals. And we can get a referral list from them, and we get that same vendor list from companies that we haven't even worked with yet. So very, very simple. Another question as far as prospecting and list building is, I like to, if we've got a client and we built a relationship with that client, get to know all the companies that are around that client and their location and the names of those companies. Because again, we can start compiling a list and we can show that list to our current customer of the 10 companies that are around them. Chances are they know 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe all 10. And we get in a lot of doors by showing that list to a potential customer or a current customer. So the lists are endless. Don't just focus on the list that you get from manufacturers. Create your own list. Think about the RL Polk list that we talked about. Think about your 30 prospect list. So the lists are endless. Think about the trade associations. If you're in Home Builders and they've got 800 members, that's a list. And you've got something in common. The biggest thing we're looking for off any list, either we've got a selling advantage or we have something in common. Wouldn't it be easier to call somebody off the Home Builders list and say, hey, I wanted to talk with Bob. We're both members of, the Greater Tennessee Home Builders Association. The chances of getting through are going to be much, much higher. So just think about those little tips as we go forward. Thanks for joining us today. Again, you got to get outside, you got to call people, you got to get referrals, and you will find success. Thank you.